Hello everybody, welcome back to another week, another check-in. I'm actually going to do a combined week 10, week 11 check-in this week. Obviously part of last week I was away and then I wanted to make sure that I recap all of the data. So I've just gotten back home from Australia yesterday. So I am feeling so tired today. In fact, I woke up this morning with so much anxiety, and I think I had to kind of talk myself off a bit of a ledge. Truth be told, I think it's just feeling extra fatigue. And for those of you that haven't traveled to Australia, maybe you've gone similar distances, but to just different places, I guess I'll fill you in on those details. So I'm based here in Florida, so we're over on the far east coast of the US. Our flight, I guess, from the US to Australia was from San Francisco. So that flight from Florida, Fort Lauderdale, where I am located, over to San Fran is a 6-hour flight. And then it was a 16-hour flight from San Fran to Sydney. So, and then once we landed in Sydney, we then caught a flight up north to Coolangatta, which is only a 50-minute or a 60-minute flight. And then I had a 3-hour drive with our rental car up to Noosa, which is by far one of my favorite places in all of Australia. So a lot of travel, and then obviously doing the same thing on the way back. I think it's actually worse coming home because you're kind of ready to go to sleep and it's not really bedtime when you arrive. So I know that my body clock is all off at the moment, and it's probably going to take me this week to start to feel normal again. So I'm kind of giving myself a little bit of grace. So if you are somebody that has done a big shift in your body clock because you've traveled for work or pleasure, try not to set the expectations too high, I think, for that week of training, especially if there's been more than like a 3-hour time shift. In Australia, I believe it's like 16-hour time difference. So it's kind of wild. But anyway, so yeah, I'm feeling a little bit tired and beat up this morning, but I wanted to make sure that I hopped on and got in all of the information and data that I did track. So one of the things before I jetted off to Australia last week was do all of my maintenance calorie calculations. So you may recall me pulling up and doing the math for you, and my maintenance calories came in at 1639. Now, I didn't track a dang thing while I was away. I was very mindful with my food choices. I definitely didn't eat everything that I wanted to eat. I was really selective with, okay, if I'm going to have, a big breakfast or something that contains more calorically dense foods, like some of the delicious platters that we were making as our brunch. And typically how I would work my morning was we would get up, we'd either go for a walk. In Noosa, it was absolutely beautiful. We would go through some of the national parks as kind of our morning 1 hour up to 2 hours. I remember one morning we went to, or at least attempted to go to this lookout called Hell's Lookout. And I think it's called Hell's Lookout because it doesn't matter whether it's beautiful and sunny, it kind of rains in that one particular spot, or at least that was what we encountered. So we would do our morning walks in there, squeezed in sometime in the morning. We'd go and get a training session done, and we'd basically be back by 9:30 a.m. And because the sun comes up so early, and I guess because our body clocks were all backwards, it was actually really easy to get up super early. So most mornings we were up at least by 5:30 a.m. And it meant that we had a really good part of the day to kind of do whatever we wanted to do once I'd finished training. So we'd go for a walk along the Noosa National Park, which hopefully you can see some of the pictures in the video that we took while we were doing that. Sam, oh my God, I cracked up. He had never seen the giant spiders. I guess that, you hear of all these dangerous animals and crazy insects. They do exist, but they're not really, you don't see a lot of these things just in the cities. But Noosa, because it's a little bit more remote, and there is a lot of national park and hinterland, you do get to see a little bit more of the creepy crawlies. So we were walking one day and I'm like, hey Sam, look up. And there are these giant spiders that are literally the size of your hand. I hope that I've got a video here that I can show you of. But he was like, oh my God. So he's taking photos and videos, and admittedly it was a little creepy because it's been a while since I've lived there too. So that was funny. But anyhow, we go and get our training sessions done and then come back. And at least 3 of the mornings, my breakfast was like a cheese platter. So we had like all kinds of cheeses, different dips, some lunch meats, and then like a champagne, mimosa or something like that. So we definitely enjoyed breakfast. But to my point, if I knew that I was having a really calorically dense, brunch like that, namely just from the cheese, because they are so high in fat, I would then make sure that I had a lighter style of dinner. I definitely wouldn't have like a lunch. I would just wait and go all the way through to the end of the day. And to be frank, I wasn't super hungry anyway. And then I would have, just a piece of protein or something like that at dinner, whether it was fish, lamb, beef, chicken, you name it. We probably tried everything while we were away. I got to enjoy some barramundi, which is a fish that I really miss, and got to enjoy that cooked multiple different ways while we were away. So yeah, I guess that was kind of my approach, at least in terms of being mindful with my calories. Now, I will say there were definitely days where I know my caloric intake was a little bit higher than this, but I also think there were probably some days that have been a little lower than that as well. I wasn't, eating everything that I wanted to. It was definitely a conservative holiday. I wasn't just kind of, drinking or anything like that. I would have a couple of cocktails, by the pool. And then, I'd kind of find a stopping point, and then I might have another glass of wine or a cocktail at dinner, if we caught up with friends or with my mum and my stepdad. So, I don't have any macro tracking data to show you. Do I regret my decision not to track? Yes and no. I think I knew that I had planned to take a diet break for the week of my birthday anyway. So it's kind of factored in, at least to my overall, trajectory, like where do I want to be and at what time. So I'm not too concerned that I didn't track that past week. And again, because I have been tracking for such a long time, I feel very comfortable in knowing what I'm putting in and how much I'm getting. So I don't know that I have put on a crazy amount of body fat this past week. And also, let's go and have a look at my training data while I was here. So you can see I actually got 5 workouts in. So that's more than what I would do like in a typical work week here while I'm in Florida. But most of the sessions here, at least 2 of the sessions, they were a little bit shorter. So you can see here, there's a 60-minute session there. There's another 60-minute session here and a 55-minute session on Saturday, I think it was. Friday or Saturday, one of these days. So collectively, it looks like I've done more, but when you go and add up the total calories from those 5 sessions, they're actually similar, in fact, a tiny little bit less than what my 4 sessions are that I usually do here. So I'm really happy that I was able to get all of my training in while I was on holiday. And honestly, it didn't feel like too much pressure or stress. I think I enjoyed it more just because I was on vacation. I wasn't trying to rush through it or, have to get back to the office to do client check-ins or anything like that, or meetings. And because we were getting them done so early, it didn't really feel like it disrupted my holiday at all. And in fact, our walks, so you can see here, I did 5 intentional walks while we were away. It was so nice. I mean, the trail walk in Noosa was obviously beautiful. And I would have done that regardless of, being a competitor or not. It's so cool to just see the different landscape. And then all of these walks were done along the beach in Broad Beach. And one of the mornings we did a slightly longer one. I think it might actually be this one here on Saturday. It probably needs to stay closer to like 75 or 90 minutes. We actually walked from our hotel room down to Nobby's Beach, and I actually got to catch up with Hattie Bodall. So I was like, oh my God, that's right. She has recently or relatively recently relocated from Sydney to Gold Coast. So yeah, we got to have a nice coffee and some breakfast. And that was quite a big walk to kind of get down to where she was located. So that was super fun. But again, I would have done these things regardless of whether I'm on prep. Like, I really enjoy getting outside, getting a bit of vitamin D, getting a bit of sun. Although I will say one of the things that I didn't come away with after being back home was a tan. I'm still so pale. And the spray tan that I had prior to going has definitely worn off. So I am back to being pasty. We'll probably get some kind of, I don't know, tanning product going on here soon, or I'm going to start to turn translucent the way I'm going. So you can see my steps actually were quite high at 10,500 for the time that we're away, which is really, really good. I'm very happy with that. There are a couple of days you can see here, at least for the travel days. So we traveled Friday through Sunday. And those were like 1,700, 3,900, because obviously you're just sitting and there's like the little bit of movement that you do between, the gate to gate. So for the rest of the time though, it was pretty active, and I got to 10,500 steps. So I did also take a weight this morning and just about had a heart attack. So again, thinking of anxiety, like what would possibly make me feel stressed and anxious this morning? And I think that was definitely it. So if you recall, just prior to me leaving, I had gotten down to 133, 134. Which was like my leanest, weight or weigh-in for the entire prep so far. So initially to kind of hop on the scale, after a holiday and see 140, like that is kind of, it's very nerve-wracking. I mean, for anybody, myself included, I won't lie and pretend like, oh, it didn't bother me. No, absolutely it did. But I also know there are a few caveats. So number one, I got my cycle yesterday. So just as we were heading off to get on the plane, I'm like, great, got my period, just what I want. Cramping on an airplane that I already can't sleep on. Excellent. So I know that my weight is a little bit inflated right now. I also know that I did eat higher on some days than my maintenance calories. So I probably have put on maybe a pound of body fat since these weigh-ins here, which I had anticipated. So, if my average was 133.6 the week before I left, I would assume that I have gained at least 1 pound of body fat, maybe even a pound and a half. But it's like, okay, well, but where does the rest come from? So again, thinking about menstrual cycle and the influences that's going to have on my total body water. I also ate a good chunk of carbohydrate compared to what I normally do. So if I think about my total caloric consumption for that entire trip, I wasn't trying to hit protein. I was just trying to hit a calorie goal or like stay in a rough range. Obviously, I wasn't tracking accurately. I was just doing that mindfully. And again, as a dietitian and somebody that's been tracking foods for way too long, more than I care to admit, I know that as a percentage of my total calories, I would say, maybe 30% of my daily intake was coming from protein and the rest was either a combo of carbs and or fats. So in terms of energy balance, my energy balance may have shifted slightly because of that switch in the distribution from carbs and fats from what would normally be protein. So again, just thinking about the thermogenic effect of food, obviously protein has a much higher TEF than carbohydrate and fat. That said, it's only 10% of what your total daily energy requirements are in total. So it's a small percentage in the grand scheme of things. So maybe a subtle positive increase just because I wasn't trying to hit protein while I was away. I was just trying to hit my carbs and fats. And some of that is strategic. I was actually chatting with Sam before I left and we were kind of looking at my muscularity at the point at which we went away. And I still think I might be a little bit too muscular for Bikini because I have come from, a different federation where, more muscular tends to be, favored. So I wasn't concerned about losing lean tissue, for the week that I was away. I would say I probably wouldn't have regardless because I was still lifting, most of the time. But my protein intake was definitely a lot lower. So, maybe there's been a tiny, teeny, weeny little bit of atrophy by not hitting my protein goals. But I'd be very surprised if it was meaningful. So that was kind of an intentional decision for going away on the holiday, just knowing that I already have probably more muscle than I need to for Bikini. And then thinking about some of the other influences that could have affected my body weight outside of my period, and then also changing up the ratio of carbs, fats, and proteins would probably be my fiber. I know for me, while I've been away, my fiber intake has been much, much lower. I I did intentionally go to the grocery store on one of the days and buy a bunch of kind of foods that I could have in the hotel room. So we had in both of the hotels that I stayed at, I was really specific in choosing places that had a kitchen, so that I could prep whatever I wanted at any time. So on a couple of the days, instead of having a meal out for lunch or for dinner, I actually bought a bunch of different salad ingredients. So I had like a couple of different bags of different lettuces and kale, like a spinach blend, kale and spinach. And then I also used, oh goodness, what's it called? It's like a cauliflower blend. So not a cauliflower. What's the word that coleslaw blend. So it had red cabbage, green cabbage, carrot, and a couple of other ingredients like that. So I basically just put it all into Ziploc bags, kind of shook it up. I bought some pre-made chicken breast, like grilled, or I think it was shredded chicken breast. Put that in, and then I got a light mayonnaise and some salt and pepper. Put it all together, shook it up, and then that was a nice, easy option for me to have, which I think I did 3 times for either a lunch or a dinner. And I had that inside some low-carb, high-fiber wraps. So again, kind of getting back to some of the things that could potentially be influencing my weight right now. Number one would be sodium content. I've just eaten out almost every single meal bar, like 5 meals that I've just described. So I know that my total body water again is going to be slightly elevated because of that consistent every single day. My sodium intake would be significantly higher than what my normal average is. So if my average here is sitting around 2,000, 2,300, I would argue that my sodium for the last 7 to 10 days is probably closer to 5,000. Again, with all of the cheeses, with some of the sushi, and then some of the dishes that I had that were like lamb based and they were just delicious. You can just taste the salt when you're not used to cooking quite as salty as those foods. So I think over the next couple of days, when my food choices return to normal, I'll probably see a pretty big whoosh effect or a bit of a drop off, just because my sodium is going to not be influenced, will not be influencing my total body water as much anymore. Fiber, I definitely feel like I'm a little bit constipated after not having my normal foods. I definitely found that to be kind of like problematic a little bit over the holiday. So again, that was one of the reasons why I was really intentional with making sure I had, at least every 2 days, like this big salad, just so that I was getting some dietary fiber, because that can start to really catch up with you, and it just progressively feels worse and worse and worse. So that could also be influencing my weight a little bit at the moment. And then I don't think there's anything over on the training side that would be influencing my weight. I still did my training sessions. I still push pretty hard. So I don't think that there is anything there that's probably skewing my body weight. So I am very interested, very nervous to see how my weight responds over the next couple of days of getting back into the habit of tracking again. So we shall see. I'm going to be doing some videos across the course of the week of my training, and I'll be able to kind of do some side-by-side comparisons just to see how I'm looking. So I can definitely tell just over the last 7 days, just recording some of my training clips, like right before the day that I left, we've got some footage of me doing like a pull-up, like an isometric hold for 30 seconds. And then there is some video footage of me doing some pull downs like 2 days ago at one of the gyms. And I can definitely see like I'm just looking a little bit washed out. So number one, yes, a little bit of body fat regain, but also when you change up your macronutrient ratios, like your body's going to change a little bit. So with more carbohydrates, you've got a much fuller looking muscle. While that carbohydrate's kind of moving into the muscle, there's going to be like a temporary period where you kind of look a little bit washed out because you've got more extracellular fluid floating around. And that does not give you those kind of hard cut lines that you might be used to seeing. So, I have to just remind myself of all those things as well, and not panic about it, and just kind of get back to the things that I know are going to allow me to be really successful with this prep. So what else did I want to talk to you guys about? Oh, I need to go and train here very soon. I'm getting my notifications. So I think looking at my adjustments for this coming week, I'm actually going to jump right back into the macros that I was hitting right before I left. So 13:35. I'm not giving myself a high day this week. I want to have 7 days of hitting relatively consistent macros. If anything, if I go out for dinner or something on the weekend, I'll probably end up doing a little bit more like time restricted eating. So for instance, like if Sam comes down on Saturday and we decide to go out for dinner, I'll probably, rather than like giving myself, high days, what I think I will do, again, just to be a little bit or feel a bit more comfortable in my macros, is do more like a protein modified fast in the mornings. So I'll have protein kind of consistently until the point he gets here. And then at least I've got, all of my carbohydrates or a good chunk of those carbs and fats left to be able to order something out for dinner. As I get closer, I probably will start to take my little food scale to restaurants with me. I haven't needed to do that thus far. I felt very comfortable with the food choices that I've been eating. But as we get down to the wire and as I need to keep seeing more and more progress, I need to get more and more accurate. So I will probably take my little food scale, and I usually just sit that right next to my like main plate with like a side dish or a side plate sitting on it. And that way, like when my main meal comes out, let's say I order a steak and there's like some different sides and things that we've ordered, I'll literally just take the filet, plop it on the side dish, which has got the scale underneath, and I can take a quick peek at what it weighs rather than estimating. Even though, when you go to a restaurant, it might say it's like 8 ounces or 12 ounces. And again, that's the cooked weight. So you're probably going to see the weight look a little bit less on the scale because it's now been cooked. So keep that in mind too when you're ordering. Whatever the weight on the scale on the menu is, that is the weight that they're using in the raw state, not what it should weigh when you put it on the scale. So I will probably start to implement that here over the next week or two, just to make sure that my tracking is accurate and it's not a cause for me not making progress. And then my training this week will be back to normal. So I'm up to my last week of training for Miss Bikini Olympia, which means that next week you guys will be getting access to the week 6 through 12 program, which is super exciting. So as many of you probably are already aware, you're able to get the Miss Bikini Olympia, let me put that in here, part 1. That program is already available for free and to download. It's listed in all of the YouTube links. So you go and check that out by visiting the beer-body.com/free download Bikini Olympia. All of the other free links and trackers are available as well. So my free progress tracker is available in the links here in the description. All of the recipes that I've been providing are available as well. So last week, or just before I went away, I had the carrot cake slice added. I had a chicken Caesar salad with lemon basil marinade. I also tried a new recipe, which were the Korean barbecue chicken meatballs, which I'm just entering down here. You can see I've got some pictures and all the recipes, the macros, how many servings it makes. So don't forget to go and check out all of those recipes. They are linked in the description. And then you can also get access to my weekly check-in sheets. And then also some of the things that I had linked previously were the Riderwear. If you want to get access to all of Riderwear's gear at some discounted prices, those links are listed, but my discount code is just Holly10. And a host of other good things are available as well. So don't forget to check out the links with all of those descriptions. Okay, guys, before I forget, questions from YouTube. So let's pop over and have a look at last week's questions, because I know there were 7, we've got 55 comments, holy moly. All right, so let's go through and I'll see if I can respond to these. Did lots of people just saying that they don't mind me putting in all of the data, and then they're happy that this isn't just vlog style. They've enjoyed really learning, which is excellent, and they appreciate all of the in-depth knowledge and insight. More people saying they love the data and they love the organization. Okay, let me see if I can get to the questions. Okay, so here we have a question. Excellent. Two quick questions. So question number one, given that I have heard you say on several occasions that it's not ideal when you're using a 4-day program to do the lifts in 4 straight days, can you share what the best approach would be? Is it better to do every other day? And then I'll look at the second question here in a moment. So yeah, in an ideal world, because these programs that I'm doing right now, they have about 10 or 11 exercises, and that's condensed into 4 days. So again, just to reiterate for anybody that didn't or missed why I'm doing 4 days with such long sessions, I don't really have a 5th day, or at least not for the last several weeks. I haven't had time to be able to be in the gym that many days of the week. So in order to meet like the minimum volume requirements to make sure that I'm progressing, that's just how big those sessions had to be, to make sure that I was hitting, 25 working sets on glutes and 25 working sets on my shoulders, and then getting enough volume in on all of the other muscle groups to make sure that I'm still growing and or expending a certain amount of energy. So in an ideal world, I would give yourself, day on, day off, day on, day off, like in that kind of fashion, or at least for the easier of the sessions. And again, depending on which program you're doing, some like day 4 might be easier than day 2. If you're doing part 2, day 3 might be easier than day 1. So I think there's usually going to be a program that takes you a little bit less time and isn't quite as difficult. So, that program might be fine done back to back. But in an ideal world, I would try to space out the 2 heaviest programs just to give yourself a little bit more recovery time. What I have found in my experience of doing these programs back to back, so right before I went away, I had to make sure that I got all my training done because I was basically traveling for 3 days. So and then I didn't want to have to train the day that we arrived. So I did everything back to back and I was really, really sore. So I can still do the work, but the downside is, going into the gym under recovered, doing my training in that way, it probably means that I'm not quite getting the same kind of signaling for muscle growth by training in that unrecovered state than I would if I had some more recovery time and I'm going in rested and that muscle is able to better respond to the stimulus that I'm kind of providing it. So I hope that answers that question. And then the second question was, upon review of the first glutes and shoulders workout, it's quite similar to your bikini part 1. Is that right? Or am I missing something? It could certainly be because your goals are similar. Yes, so you're absolutely right. The glutes and shoulders program series are similar in nature because my goals haven't really changed personally. They are a little bit shorter in length. The total set number or weekly set number for the muscle groups is a little bit different. So you will see that there are some subtle differences between the two. But I will say that right now, the current program, the Bikini Olympia program, is over 4 days and is extremely challenging. With 10 or 11 exercises, it's definitely my biggest program condensed into 4 days. So I hope that answers that question. Okay, let's scroll down and see if we've got some more that I can answer. Okay, Someone says, how do you not burn out? You seem to do so much work. I love my job too, but working so much absolutely burns me out and I'm still recovering 2 years on. Tell me your secrets. You know what? I will say that I definitely experienced burnout. I would say like right now I'm kind of maxed out. But there's everything that I'm doing I really enjoy. I love, business growth. I'm somebody that's constantly, creating, building, growing. Like I really enjoy those things. So if anything, I kind of need someone to put the brakes on a little bit for me and just kind of remind me that, hey, it's okay to move at a little bit of a slower speed. So I definitely experience burnout, as much as the next person. But I think if anything, where I tend to shift my priorities is my social life. So that's kind of the area that becomes like my second priority or my third priority. I'll always seem to kind of keep my number 1 priorities as my career. And then in this case, it's going to be my training. So those 2 things come first at the moment. And then, social life or anything extra is, it's further down the list. If I only have enough time to do, X number of things, then the social life may actually not make the cut. It might just be that week is a pretty simple, boring week. I don't see anybody. I don't do anything. And if I can fit it in at a later time, then I might do that. So someone asked me a question on Instagram the other day, like, what TV series are you watching and what's something that you really enjoy? And I giggled because besides Thanksgiving of last year, which I very unusually, very out of character, decided to binge watch a TV series on Netflix called Blackbird for the whole day after finishing Thanksgiving lunch. I actually honestly don't watch TV. I have a TV, which is unusual because I didn't used to. But honestly, it's just not how I like to spend my time. I think if I do have any free time, I'm probably catching up on like administrative stuff, stuff with the house, or I just don't really have a whole lot of free time. So yeah, I really love what I do. Business and career kind of always end up being at the very top. Okay, so another question here is, you mentioned that you don't train your biceps right now. Have you always avoided bicep training during your training, or did you go through a time previously with very specific bicep work to make them grow? I'd really like some definition like yours, and I'm wondering if I can obtain that look without specific bicep training. Thank you. So great question. I used to train my biceps, absolutely. So I would say maybe for the first 2 years of my career lifting, all of my training programs would have had bicep and tricep work, but they didn't make up, a huge percentage of my overall programs. In fact, I'd probably say that the most I've ever trained biceps and triceps would be like 9 sets per week. So if you look at the training volumes for an advanced lifter that would be indicative of growth, I would say that that's not really an impressive volume at all. That would be more like maintenance volume. Now, I think when I was a beginner, 9 hard working sets on my biceps and triceps would have led to some growth. But I think, at a certain point, that's not really going to be an adequate stimulus anymore. And now I'm just maintaining. So I haven't really been somebody that's ever prioritized growth, not to the point where I am now with my glutes and my shoulders, where I'm doing, 25 working sets across the course of the week. Never. So you will train your biceps and triceps like as a secondary muscle group to any of your pulling and pushing movement. So if you do any chest training, you're going to be getting some tricep. If you're doing any back training, you're going to be getting biceps. I would say even now when I do like some of my pull down exercises or movements, occasionally I have felt that my biceps might have been the limiting factor on doing another rep. So I think that they are getting pushed to failure at times, but it's not intentional. It's through, being a secondary muscle group, but maybe a weaker muscle group. So for you to answer your question, if you do want to grow more bicep muscle, I would probably make sure that you're hitting them about 15 times per week to see some meaningful growth, and just recognize that then any additional back and chest work, you might also be adding in, 3 or more sets, depending on how many sets you go to failure with on those muscle groups. You might also be getting close to failure on the bicep and tricep there as well. So you might pick up another, 9 to 12 sets, depending on how many back and chest exercises you are doing. So I hope that answers that question. So scrolling down, if you're starting out, how do you know if you should decrease calories or reverse diet for the best results? I'd like to lose fat and gain muscle. So that's a pretty common goal for most people starting out. And I'd say even for people that have been lifting for a while, they're still trying to kind of get to their ideal. So I think what would really govern whether or not I say somebody you should start dieting versus, jump into a reverse diet would be looking at what their current caloric intake is based on their lean body mass. So I would say that if you can do a quick calculation, we can kind of get a ballpark of where your current calories are in terms of are they normal or not. So if your calories are currently below 30 per kilogram of lean body mass, then I would say that you probably shouldn't be dieting. If your calories are well above 30 calories per kilogram of lean body mass, then you're probably in an okay position to diet first. However, if you know that your goal physique is going to require you to put on some muscle, I would probably say that you're going to have to do that work at some point. So trying to diet first, and for every week that you choose to diet, that's kind of like just adding on a week to getting to your ultimate goal. Because for every week that you decide to do a cut, you're not really going to be making meaningful or any appreciable gains towards muscle mass. Like, that's truly just an aesthetic based goal. So, if you decide to spend 25 weeks of the whole year cutting, then that's 25 weeks that you're still going to have to do at some point to build muscle. So, I tend to encourage people to do the work with regards to adding muscle first and do it as directly as you can. If you, like some of the ladies that have said, okay, I'm committed to this, what's the fastest route to getting to my ultimate goal? Well, then it would be do the building phase and stay in a building phase for as long as you need to get to the desired lean muscle mass, and then cut. Because if you decide to do, lots of cuts, a little bit of build, another cut, a little bit of build, every week that you cut is basically just time where you're not getting to that ultimate goal. It's just aesthetic based. So the most fast-tracked way of getting to your ultimate goal would be to not even consider dieting, go straight through, build. And that could be a 2 or 3 year period. But then at least you've created the shape, you've built up the BMR, you've built up the metabolism, and then you cut. And then, that's the most direct route. So I hope that answers your question. I think a lot of people kind of get sidelined and derailed with the idea of wanting to do these cuts because they like looking a little bit leaner or feeling a little bit leaner. But it is also just adding weeks to getting to the end goal. Okay, the next person has asked, sorry if you've already answered this question and I missed it, but I'm doing my first mini cut and so far I haven't lost any strength, but I do feel it coming. Do you recommend staying at the same weight and just pushing out fewer reps, or would you go lighter weight and keep the same reps or more? So I think what you're kind of getting at or alluding to here is that you're in a calorically restricted state and you're starting to feel, the difficulty with the training. And unfortunately, like subjectively, you will feel that the training sessions get harder. You may actually not see any appreciable losses in strength. That would usually come after like appreciable changes in lean body mass where you've actually lost muscle mass. And that would result in a decrease in your weight lifted. But most often the initial experience that we have is just your subjective experience of that training program. Your true strength isn't really affected. It's just being limited, or there's a ceiling because you are feeling fatigued due to low caloric intake. So, if you're feeling okay, is there any kind of tricks basically you're asking me about training that might allow you to keep going? So I personally find, strength-based training really hard when I'm dieting, and I mean specifically 1 to 8 reps. That's just tough because not only is it physically demanding, it's also really mentally taxing. If you go in to do like a 5 rep max, like it's tough, you've got to mentally prepare for that as much as you do physically prepare. So I'm a bigger proponent of doing higher rep ranges, 8 and above when I'm dieting. It doesn't mean that I haven't done those types of rep schemes, historically. In fact, I have programs right now available that allow you to do that, but not everybody's dieting. So, those programs are written with, specific goals in mind, and that those programs might be specifically, well, this person wants to not only improve their strength, but they also want to see some muscle growth. So, I write programs to cater to that. But if you're dieting, it definitely gets a little bit more challenging. So if you subjectively feel like doing higher rep ranges is easier and you're going to failure, then I'd say that there's no decrement to making that adjustment. I would argue that the 1 to 8 rep range is not actually as effective for muscle growth as staying in that higher, or moderate to high rep range in terms of muscle growth. So you've said, I'm guessing that I should keep my weight higher and not go down until I can hit 8 reps and then make the change. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing those lower rep ranges. It's good to have a combination of both, but I think when you're dieting, they are definitely a little bit more challenging to kind of muster up the mental strength and tenacity to do that as well. Okay. So the next question is, what is your opinion on Stephanie Buttermore's all-in approach? And would you do it? So just to give people some context, if you aren't familiar with, the all-in approach, it's basically what a lot of people have done in response to having some kind of disordered eating or just a dysfunctional relationship with food. Stephanie was really struggling with that, in her contest prep years. And I guess her approach to kind of getting out of that was just going, I'm not tracking. I need to, develop a better relationship with all these foods that I've restricted for such a long time. So I'm going to bring them all back in and just see what happens. And in that particular instance, so Stephanie ate a lot of calories. She had a terrible relationship with some of these foods, things that had been restricted and off limits for such a long time. So, when we bring those foods back in, when we start to reintroduce them, we tend to go overboard. It's really hard to, stop and kind of say no when, for so long it's been no. There's always been a ceiling or a limit or even, the ability to enjoy these types of foods. So it does tend to result in a pretty extreme weight fluctuations initially. Now, I would argue, however, for some people, that's almost what they need to do to kind of get it out of their system. And I know for me, I probably took more of a balanced approach. I didn't want to experience the mental turmoil of having everything back in my diet again as I was overcoming my eating disorder. I was a little bit more, I guess I took my time with it. But I also can say in my experience, the longer you keep certain foods out of bounds, off limits, hidden, or with, ceilings with how much and the quantity that you consume, it kind of delays the time at which you can better establish a positive relationship with that food. So, for me, finally, none of the foods that, I had kind of restricted or limited, and again, just to be really clear, as somebody that's always practiced flexible dieting, there's never been anything that's off limits. But with caloric restriction and lots of competitions, I've always had a calorie ceiling. I've always had macro limits. So it's meant that certain foods just didn't fit. I couldn't put them all in. Or if I did, I could only have such a small amount. So I still had a pretty estranged relationship with a lot of foods. So I even experienced that when I started to reintroduce those foods again. And I definitely struggled. I mean, there were times where I'm like, why can't I just have a bowl of ice cream and put it back like a normal person? And, instead I'd want to eat the whole tub. I'm like, it didn't make sense at the time. But now, in hindsight, of course, when you've had so many things that are restricted for such a long period of time, it makes sense that when they're back, in kind of in plain view, so to speak, that you don't know when you're going to get them again. So you tend to want to eat a lot more of it, much more than your true physiological needs. And also when you've had that psychological restriction where you've had to say no, it's a lot of relearning, like new pathways and habits around food. So would I do it? I kind of did. I didn't do it quite to that extreme. I was a little bit slower with, how many different foods I reintroduced at a time. And I typically would do it with like 2 or 3 things at once, not everything. And I would start by, giving myself little homework challenges where, okay, if I'm going to start to reintroduce desserts, I might not have it all in my home all at once. It might be, okay, we're going to go out and have this meal, in a restaurant, and you're going to enjoy a whole serving, not just have a bite of it because that's all you can fit. and then it might be buying single serves to bring into the home. And then eventually with time, now I can have all of those foods in my house and not feel compelled to eat the entire jar of peanut butter or have the whole tub of ice cream, because I know when my calories have been good and I've been in a building phase, like I can have as much of those things and still feel really satiated. So I hope that answers that question. Okay, next question here. So, would you recommend a fat loss phase alternating between fat loss and maintenance? So, for example, 3 weeks in a deficit and then 1 to 2 weeks at maintenance and then repeat. I want to lose about 10 to 12 pounds, but I feel like I have a very adaptive metabolism, so I struggle to reach that goal without cutting my calories too low. So this is definitely an approach that you can do. I've done that with my own contest preps where I've had, 2 weeks in a deficit, 1 week off, 2 weeks on, 1 week off. The only downside is that it can take a little bit longer, but I think some people need more time. If you've got a really crazy schedule, it's hard to restrict. Like there's so much more planning that has to go into caloric restriction with nutrition and training that sometimes it's the reality is you can't fit everything in. So you can't create the deficit that you need to lose the weight. So it might not be that you can't get there, but you just need a little bit more time. So I think sometimes spreading out and just giving yourself a bit more buffer capacity and time to get to the 10 to 12 pounds in your case can be a really good idea. But in terms of that mitigating or offsetting an adaptive metabolism, I would say no. The things that influence somebody's metabolism is just their total lean body mass. You can offset your metabolism a small amount. We talk about negative adaptations in response to a diet, but we also can talk about adaptation in the positive direction too, where, when we slowly reintroduce calories, we can see some positive adaptation taking place, but there's always a ceiling. You can't just keep going and going and going. So I don't know that strategy is necessarily going to be one that would help offset and adapt someone with an adaptive metabolism. But I think it would allow you to potentially get to the end goal without having to crush yourself. But, if you're having to get to low calories, I'm in the same boat. I always have had to diet on pretty low calories. Historically, it used to be because I would always end up binge eating and then restricting, binging and then restricting. And that was, again, in light of having had an eating disorder. This prep has been, and many of my more recent preps where I've kind of overcome the eating disorder, have been a lot more, smooth sailing. I haven't had those kind of, massive caloric, binges and then having to cut really low to kind of get back to where I was. But ultimately, everybody has a place where they're going to plateau. And you need to create more of a deficit. And, for some of us, we're just not active enough. I'm a very sedentary person outside of my, 90 minutes of training that I do. And then I have to do at least 60 minutes of planned walking just to get to 10,000 steps every day. So I'd say that, you might be somebody that has to get your calories very low because maybe you're not somebody that can also be very active, which would help create more of a deficit. Or maybe there's lots of tracking errors. And again, I've had those periods myself, or, where I've been binge eating and haven't really known what I've eaten. So, consequently, my calories were actually a lot higher. And then I've had to restrict again to kind of get back on track, so to speak. So, and then the other thing is if your calories are having to get very low, it might just be like, this is the limitations of your metabolic rate. You only have so much lean tissue that's going to drive up your metabolism. So like right now for me, if I want to lose, at my weekly intended rate of weight loss, which is I think about 0.7, let me go back over to my sheets, 0.8 is what I've been shooting for. I have to be on 1,300 calories because I can only do this much activity. And that's where my ceiling is. I have to be able to cut more calories or do more exercise in order to get to my goals. So yeah, that will differ from person to person. So I hope that makes sense. So people asking about links to the recipes, they're always just available in the description of YouTube. Okay. Regarding the sleep issue, do you think it's possible for people who work midnight shifts to find a way to save those days from being a total disaster from the muscle building perspective? How much of an impact do you feel it has on the average week? So I think for this person, it sounds like you are maybe a shift worker, and maybe you're concerned about its impacts on your, I guess, muscle protein synthetic response to training. So that's really interesting. I think I probably need to know a little bit more about your schedule, because if you just have a normal, like if your schedule is just you work really late, but then you're sleeping until midday the following day, and your circadian rhythm has adapted to a different sleep like cycle, then there may not actually be too much of a significant negative impact on your capacity to build muscle. I think for people that have a really disrupted and ever-changing sleep-wake cycle, that can be really problematic. I even know for me, having just flown back from Australia, with my circadian rhythm all over the place, this week in terms of my body's capacity to, get optimal signaling for muscle growth, it's probably going to be somewhat blunted. So, I mean, it's a good thing that I'm not traveling like that all the time. Otherwise, I probably would have to do a lot more work to get the same response. So it is frustrating. But yeah, I think if your normal, going to bed time is just pretty late due to working a shift, and then you get the appropriate amount of sleep and recovery time, then it might not be a total disaster. I was actually thinking you were going to ask, maybe it's become a total disaster in terms of calories. And I would say for the people that are doing shift work and maybe you don't have a normal, consistent number of hours that you're awake and then asleep, maybe some weeks, like week on, week off, you have like a much longer, working weight than others. That in those particular instances, I would probably say just give yourself more calories on those days because your body's doing more. And that actually leads me to think, so when you are traveling, so in the situation like where I've just been away, because I knew there was going to be a period of time where I am awake for many, many more hours than I am used to, a little quick trick that I like to do, and I'll pull up the calculator here just so that we can do the math together. If your current, let's say maintenance calories or your current calories are, we'll just say 1600. The quick and dirty way to do this would be to take that number and then divide it by 24 hours in the day. So basically this is saying that every hour that you are awake, your body is expending about 66 calories. Now, we know that, your sleep caloric expenditure versus your daytime activity caloric expenditure is probably very different, right? But this is a very rough way that you can do it if you need to kind of give yourself a bit more flexibility with calories. So let's say for, the average day, you normally are awake for 15 hours. And if you're traveling, maybe you're going overseas, you know that you're actually going to be staying up many, many hours later. So it might mean that your time zone, you're going to bed and it's like 3 a.m. But wherever you're going to, maybe it's only 10 p.m. So you're staying up, several hours more. Let's say you stayed up an additional 4 hours. I would take this number and I would multiply it by 4. So I would be happy to give myself on a day where I have stayed up many, many more hours than I usually am, an additional 266 calories, just to accommodate those extra hours of being awake and active. So for the shift worker here, that might be also something that you can consider with the days that are a little bit longer than normal, to make sure that you feel like you're getting enough nutrition, because I have definitely seen and worked with clients who have come to me and their coach has just given them one set of macros, when in actual fact, their body's demands are radically higher on some days than others. So, it wouldn't make sense to expect you not to get starving hungry on a day where you're awake for many more hours. So that's a quick little equation that you can do to help with that. Do I count my HIIT cardio steps towards my steps? Sorry, my HIIT cardio towards my steps. Yes, I do. If I was doing HIIT cardio that involved stepping. So at the moment, all of my HIIT cardio is actually done on a bike. So it's not contributing to my additional steps. But let's say it was, for instance, and I was doing like a boot camp or something. Yes, I would still count that towards my daily steps. So if my step goal was 10,000, on the day where I've got a HIIT class, I might end up just getting to my 10,000 a little bit quicker than I might otherwise. So yes, I do. Okay, question. So I have a training question. I've lowered my training workout volume over the last 12 months from 9 exercises to 6 exercises. It used to take me 90 minutes to do 3 sets, and now it takes me 65. I've trained like that for 3 years. I was tired, taxed out, and I needed to do something different, therefore a new program. I work out 4 days a week, and I noticed my waist measurement was the same, but with a couple of pounds of higher weight on average than before I started this new program. Does this mean that I've lost muscle? So I think my first, observation here, or my statement to this, would be that if you haven't made any adjustments to your nutrition or any additional changes to your other activity, since you've just reduced the overall amount of work that your body's having to do to, just stop you from being beat up and overtired, it's very possible that your energy balance is just a little bit more positive. So maybe you are just maintaining a slightly higher body fat percentage than you were. I don't think that this kind of a reduction going from 90 to 65 minutes would lead to any appreciable loss in lean tissue. It would have to be really, again, I don't know the ins and outs of the program, but maybe if there was one particular muscle group that took the biggest hit there, and maybe you went from doing, say, 30 working sets on one muscle group down to like 9. Then maybe that particular muscle group has seen a pretty significant drop off in volume, then it might have had some lean tissue loss. But if it's relatively evenly distributed and that, each muscle group's kind of taken a bit of a hit to afford you that, shorter training session, I don't think that there'd be enough of a volume adjustment to see a noticeable change in muscle mass. For one, I know I had something similar personally, and I've worked with many clients that have done the same thing and haven't really seen any change in muscle mass. It's just that, unless I made up for it through extra cardio somewhere or I modified my caloric intake, then I would just expect that my energy balance would be a bit more positive, and my weight would be a bit higher as a result. So I don't think, at least with this little bit of information that I have here, that you've lost any muscle. Okay, there's a little bit more. I'm 41 years old, 128 pounds, 1,700 calories maintenance. I lost a grand total of 1 pound doing a 15-week diet phase on 1,500 calories with a new program a few months ago. Going from 1,700 calories down to 1,500 calories, that's not really a significant drop. You'd lose some body weight or body fat, but usually in efforts to achieve meaningful fat loss, you have to take a much bigger cut than just 300 calories. That would get you so far, but then you're probably at a new maintenance calorie amount at 1,500. I would assume that you'd have to go a lot further into that deficit to create or continue to see more fat loss. So, I hope that answers that question. In terms of should you go back to your old program, that would help increase your energy expenditure. So yes, it would help you create more of a deficit. But for the extra 30 minutes, each training session, you might end up burning another 100 calories every day. So it would initially help you creating more of a caloric deficit and see some fat loss. But it's not the program that's magic. It's just the deficit that you've created. So you could probably achieve more fat loss too by just dropping your calories a bit more, because 300 calories from your previous maintenance isn't a whole lot. And again, just thinking about, just so you've got a comparison here, my maintenance calories before I started my prep were probably around 2,100. I'm down at 1,300, and I've only lost 7 pounds or 6 pounds so far. So, you have to make meaningful changes to your dietary intake or to your energy balance, whether that's through dietary restriction or extra energy expenditure, to see, meaningful changes in fat loss. I think we're probably getting towards the end. People asking about the copy of the recipes. I think that's about it. So thank you so much for all of the questions, guys. I really appreciate it. Hopefully I answered them with enough level of detail. If you are new to the channel and you've got questions, please, by all means, feel free to leave me a comment at the end of every check-in video. I always go back through and respond to all of the questions that come through. So that's it for me. I have my work cut out for me this week. I am very nervous about that scale weight number, as everybody would be who's been in a position like that where they've taken a diet break. But you know, as I talked through in the video, I think there are a lot of things that are potentially skewing my weight. I've also slept terribly. Total body water is up significantly, and you know, all of those other variables. Period. Everything. So I am excited to see how my weight looks after 7 days of hitting these new targets. And I guess I will report back to you then. So until then, have a wonderful week, and I will see you at my next check-in.